Hello, this is Pastor Matthew Woods from Grace Lutheran Church in New Albany, Indiana, and this is the weekly devotion for December 16th, 2024. Today's title, Making Things a Little Better. Well, last week, a dozen of our folks from Grace traveled to North Carolina with the help to recovery effort in Hurricane Helene. Two others who were with us were locals who worked with us all week. One was a former member out there. He and his wife were a great host, and it was most appreciated, by the way, Gary and Jill. Thank you so much. We worked 7 different properties for about 400 hours of volunteer time down there in Hendersonville, and our freshly trained chainsaw guys eagerly put their training to work, and a lot of trees were cut and cleaned up. 2 of our team brought a skid steer along, and that was a huge help, moving large logs and stumps and things, moving even some dirt. You will probably hear much more about it in upcoming services, for I have much to brag on about our people. For now, I want to point out the pattern that happened in each of the locations. I call it the disaster before the disaster. Let's start with our first one. Jan at our first stop was an older lady. She was an independent woman who fell not too long after the storm and broke her ankle. In fact, she's still in recovery there. She has a huge property, but she can't leave her house too well and can't get around. She's not very mobile. And so when the hurricane came, it made things even more complicated. A lot of trees down and messed up her yard, and even put one into her house. That's all she needed. Another stop. We met a gal by the name of Susan. And we cleaned up some downed trees by the road because she had a big mess in the woods that we were supposed to clean up. But the woman struck me as one who was facing the world all alone. She was very talkative, stayed there and told us her whole story as if she hadn't been able to tell it for a long time. But the one that stuck with me most was a lady by the name of Diane. She was diagnosed with terminal colon cancer and was given only 3 months to live. When we met her at her 10-month mark. Her husband, Mike, 8 years before, had suffered a stroke, and that stroke left his left side paralyzed. We only cleaned up 2 good-sized trees, and for our team it didn't seem like much, but for her it was a load off. It turns out the timing of things was also interesting, because right after we left, we found out that she had more bad news, and she was grateful for the trees that we'd removed. It was a peace of mind for her and her husband. She was extremely grateful, super kind, and super considerate, and considered it perfect timing. As I look at all these people, they all had stuff going on in their world before the disaster came along called Helene. Well, their world was already complicated enough. So disaster and tribulation don't just come with hurricanes. For Jan, it was age and physical limitations. For Susan, it was having neighbors that didn't seem to acknowledge her or get much time to spend with her. Our community wasn't there for her. For Diane and Mike, it was cancer and a stroke. The hurricane just made more trouble and more complications. To me, I look at the picture, this all reminds me of the picture in 1 Kings chapter 17, when Elijah goes to live with the widow in Zarephath in Sidon, not inside Israel. Elijah must travel some distance to get there, outside of Israel. And if you look at verse 10 and following, you see what happens. So he went to Zarephath, it says. When he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called to her and asked, Would you bring me a little water in a jar so I may have a drink? He asked. As she was going to get it, he called, and bring me, please, a piece of bread. As surely as the Lord your God lives, she replied, I don't have any bread. Only a handful of flour in a jar of little oil in a jug. I'm gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we might eat it and die. That's a very disrupted life. That's a life of lots of disaster already. Now we bring upon the land of famine, Oh, that's not good. As a widow, there is no one to supply her with what she needed, no husband to help her son. She's getting ready to make one last meal for her son, whom she can no longer feed, let alone herself. She's out of resources, and notice that she doesn't expect any help to come. She's at her wits' end, expecting to die. She is poor, and on top of everything else, the famine is hitting the land, which means there'll be no more food. Um, it's a disaster upon a disaster, just like we mentioned before. Her condition when Elijah found her was that condition was her storm. That was her Helene. Instead of a fallen tree, it was bread, a need to feed her son. But you see, it always works this way, doesn't it? Like those we met in North Carolina, this widow was feeling overwhelmed, and it weighed heavy on her mind, ultimately deciding, for her at least, there was nothing left to do. But there was, likewise, big trees for an elderly woman or a single woman or for one fighting cancer is a huge thing that only adds to a difficult time and steals a person's peace. Now, Elijah's job was simple. Go, show up. Just like Jesus commands his disciples in the Great Commission in Matthew 28. Go and disciple the nations. Here in 1 Kings chapter 17, it's go to the woman and stay with her. Through Elijah, God supplied them with a jar of flour that was not used up and a jar of oil that did not run dry until the Lord sent rain again many years later. For us, it was to go to North Carolina. Altogether, there were 14 of us that the Lord sent, willing to do what the Lord equipped them to do. Cut trees and move debris for those who couldn't. A couple of homeowners offered their homes and great meals. It's another thing that made it all possible. A neighbor decided to join us and give us his time as well. I could also give you a string of events and coordinations of people and churches, the district, and all the stuff that went on behind the scenes that made it possible. The trip was possible because the Lord put the pieces together. Now, the goal was to leave them a little better off than we found them. Going to help with disaster recovery isn't fixing another person's problems. Cleaning up those trees doesn't prevent cancer or age-related problems or loneliness. It just makes things a little better and maybe takes a little bit off of their mind, a little load off of them. And that, my friends, is all the Lord is asking us to do. To offer what we have and let the Lord do the rest. That's all part of discipling. We can do that, right? Even here at home with the littlest of things. So I pray that we would do that. And I pray that we would be available for those people. The people like the ones we met in North Carolina. People like this widow who need us to do something. I want to say thank you, by the way, to Gary and Jill, and Will and Lisa, and Dave and Julie, and Rick and Mark and Donna and Erica, for Larry and Joy and Wayne and Brad and Ray, for Tom and Sean, to Pastor John, to David and our friends in Mount Pisgah Lutheran Church in Hendersonville, and for helping to make things, you guys helping to make things just a little bit better for Jesus' sake, allowing us to go on that trip and to bring those resources to them. I pray blessings upon all of you, and I thank you for that. May the Lord bless you this week. May the Lord watch over all things and remind us all that we can all just make things a little bit better by offering what we can. The Lord be with you, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.